Hi, I'm Maris Kreisman, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you tonight to another excellent virtual event at McNally Jackson. If you go to mcnallyjackson.com and look at our events calendar, you'll see all the amazing writers and programs we're hosting in the coming weeks. So please keep an eye on the site or subscribe to our newsletter to hear more about what's coming up soon. There will be time at the end of tonight's conversation for your questions, so start thinking about them now. You can put your questions in the Zoom chat and we'll get to them towards the end of the evening. We're glad that even though we can't all be in the same room at the moment, we're still able to host events during this difficult time. As we've weathered the pandemic and reopened all 4 of our locations for browsing and shopping, indie bookstores like ours still need more support. And so if you enjoy free events like this one and want us to keep hosting more of them, please buy books from us. Throughout the evening, I'll post links in the chat to buy Nobody Will Tell You This But Me from McNally Jackson. And I'm so thrilled that I get to launch the paperback of that wonderful book tonight with Bess and with Karen Chee, zooming in from Korea. And it's such a delight to have so many different time zones represented in one reading. So Bess Kalb is an Emmy-nominated comedy writer and the best-selling author of Nobody Will Tell You This But Me, a New York Times editor's choice. She wrote for 8 years on Jimmy Kimmel Live and has written for the Emmy Awards, the Academy Awards, and the 2020 Democratic National Convention. She's the head writer and executive producer of the WGA Award-nominated Yearly Departed, an Amazon comedy special, and is currently adapting Nobody Will Tell You This But Me into a feature film with sight unseen pictures. And Karen Chee is a Brooklyn-based comedian, writer, and actor. She's currently writing and performing for Late Night with Seth Meyers, and she's working on a book, among other projects. So you'll have to come back when that book's out. Bess, would you like to read for us first?
Yes, thank you, Maris, for that very kind introduction, and to just echo what Maris says. This is also such a dream. McNally Jackson is the cool bookstore in America, and as a kid growing up in New York, going to McNally Jackson was a place where I had to I just sort of felt smarter by crossing the threshold, and made me want to read and made me excited about books, and it's where I saw some of my favorite authors speak. So I'm really thrilled to be here virtually under Maris's auspices, and I'm especially thrilled that I get to be here with WGA Award nominated Karen Chee, my brilliant co-writer on Yearly Departed, and somebody I admire so much. And so with that, let's get into Brooklyn at the turn of the century. Nobody Will Tell You This But Me. And if you have a copy of the book and you want to follow along, it's right at the beginning after the prologue on page 3. It's called The Fruit of the Vine. My mother taught me exactly one thing, and it's how to make brisket. It doesn't take a genius. The key is you just leave it alone. You put the side of beef in a large pot, pour in whatever, red wine, tomatoes from a can, some carrots cut up, half an onion, a fistful of kosher salt, a potato for your grandfather, and let it sit on a very low flame. I'd pour in some water if it got too dry, but otherwise it required very little effort. You could forget about it for the entire day, and there it would be. Don't say I never taught you anything. How you loved my brisket. You didn't care if it was tough. You loved the taste of the gristle on the edges and the char at the bottom of the pot. Before you came over to the house in Ardsley for Passover or for Break the Fast or what have you, you knew there would be brisket. You talk about it like a fiend. Is it time for brisket yet? Grandma, is there going to be enough brisket? Always with the appetite. Your parents never made beef because of your father's cholesterol, so you were probably very anemic. You needed the blood running through you. It's my mother's recipe, more or less. She wasn't religious, but she felt it was very important to have everyone over to the house in Greenpoint on Friday nights for Shabbat dinner. There wouldn't always be beef, but there'd be liver or sweetbreads or tongue. If you stew it long enough, what's the difference? My brothers were all grown up and out of the house, and every week she'd invite them with their wives and their children to the dining room table, the same table where we were all born. She'd preside over the whole thing. She'd stand up, bang her fist on the table, take one of my father's matchbooks from her apron pocket, and strike a match. You could hear a pin drop. She'd lean her enormous breasts over the table and light 2 long candlesticks in their brass holders she brought from Russia, and shake out the match. Then she'd put a kitchen cloth over her head, like a looming ghost. She'd slowly lift her hands up in front of her eyes and chant with her head bowed, her hands lilting back and forth with the incantations. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvah sav, which is incorrect. It's b'mitzvah tav with a T, not sav with an S. But that's how it was in the Yiddish pronunciation. V'tzivanu lahad l'kner shel Shabbat. Then, still under the cloth, she'd say to my brother, Georgie, the vine. Georgie would wink at me and foist up a cup of wine, his chest all puffed out, and he'd mouth along dramatically like an opera singer, and I'd try not to laugh as she continued on in her trance. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei pri hagafen. Blessed are you, Adonai, for giving us the fruit of the vine. Imagine calling a jug of my Zader's 40-cent kosher wine the fruit of the vine, hardly. And then she'd take the cloth off her head and fold it back up on the table, just as her mother had done before her, and hers before her, and hers before her, and so on. And there she'd stand, solemn as a statue, beholding all her creation. So decades later, I'd have the family over for Seder, and we'd all be at my house in Ardsley in our nice clothes under the crystal chandelier, and I'd stand at the head of the table and everyone would shut up. I'd light the candles in the same brass holders, and I'd blow out the match, and I'd put my cloth napkin over my head. I didn't say the prayers, I never really learned the words, but I hummed softly to myself and rocked back and forth under the veil. You asked me what I was saying. Rose, 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 my mother's name. Bessie, you are the only daughter of an only daughter of an only daughter, the fruit of the vine.
Bess, I want to start off by saying congratulations. This is so exciting. You get a paperback version of your book.
It's very exciting because I love anything that creates any kind of destruction environmentally, anything paper. As you know, it is a huge accomplishment to create more paper.
Yeah, congratulations to you on that specific.
Thank you so much. It is very exciting because the paperback is how it will be. The hardcover is a limited release, and so having the paperback is what my son will see when he goes to the bookstore, and that's its sort of final form. So yeah, it's very exciting.
He's not allowed to see the hardcover.
We don't let him. It's the sharpness. It's the we're not overprotective, but we just want to make sure that he's completely fine.
That makes sense. Here, wait, I'm gonna pin you so that you're huge on my screen. How do I make you bigger? There you are. Hi, you're
hi. I have everybody in gallery mode. Let me make you huge as well.
Oh yeah.
Speaker, there you are. Hi.
Thank you everybody for joining in. I'm so excited that there are people here celebrating Bess's book with me. I truly genuinely loved this book so much. I got it on a Kindle and then I read it like in one sitting. Like I read it from cover to cover on a Kindle, whatever that means. And it, for anybody who hasn't yet read it, I genuinely recommend it. I would recommend it even if I didn't know Bess. It's very heartfelt, but it's also not pretentious at all. It's not like saccharine, but it's still very sweet and very tender. It's legitimately a funny book. I will say, Bess, because I know you, once I read it, I was really relieved that it was actually very good, because I was otherwise like, oh no, I have to talk to Bess and be like, yay. But I genuinely thought it was fantastic.
Well, the only reason I asked you to do this event was you had already reached out to me about the book. So I fortunately, because I am too nervous to ask anybody to read it. I am too nervous to ask people who are in my family to read it. I just have to wait until they come to me. And it's good. But Karen, your support, you are one of the smartest and funniest writers I have ever met. And so your approval is everything to me. No,
this thing is about you. Wait, but that actually, something you mentioned, it was something I wanted to ask about. Has your family read this book? Has like your mom read this book?
Yes. So my mom read the book under lawyer force. My mom and I are extremely close. My mom is currently watching my child right now as he runs the streets, was the text that I got when I was like, all okay? And my parents on the group text said, he's running the streets. Yeah. So that's where he is. But she was my primary source for this book. She's my first thanks in the acknowledgments. I would call her at like late at night when I was, well, late at night her time when I was writing on the West Coast, she was on the East Coast. So she would often pick up the phone at 10:30 as I was like, oh shit, sorry. Like, and she'd be like, no, let's get into it. And she even stories that are really tough in this book. If you've read it, you know that it's the story of a woman who was a very devoted and loving grandmother, but a really tough mother. And to, you know, some might say abusive at times, certainly misguided. And a lot of those stories my mom told me. I didn't hear them from my grandmother. I heard them from my mom. And then my mother is also one of the best writers I've ever met. She wrote a book on our home computer, on like our desktop IBM computer at our house growing up. And I read the file and I stopped writing because I was like, I'll never write anything as good. It was this beautiful family drama. I still think about it, and I'm in many ways copying it all the time. And so super intimidated to send her the final product of something that she knew intimately. She was a part of, in terms of like the reporting of it. And then I sent it to her. I sent the manuscript to her before I sent it to my editor. And she lied to me. She was like, she responded, she was like, oh, beautiful, you know, lovely, thank you. And then I would have conversations with her where it was clear she was lying. And to the point where I was like, I asked Charlie, my husband, I was like, should I quiz her? Or should I be like, what did you think of the hot air ballooning scene? You know, and there is none. And
I loved it.
I mean, that's totally what I expected. And I ended up confronting her because I was like, hey, can I ask you a weird question? Did you read the book? And she said, I asked outright, and she said, no, it's grandma. And as like a daughter and an author, that was a very conflicting thing to hear. Because on the one hand, it's like, I've channeled the voice. I've like done the literary task at hand, sound exactly like this person. And on the other, I was horrified because my mom really needed to read it. And so when the legal read happened, which will happen with your forthcoming book,
What is
happens
it?
with all.
What does that mean?
A lawyer, the publishing house has a lawyer who reads the book and then flags it like it's some kind of evidence, like highlights things and is like, this could get you sued, or really could get the publishing house sued or whatever. And that's the legal read. And so I got this email that was like, hey, Penguin Random House's lawyer, sure marked up a lot in this book. Like here's the legal read. And it was all passages about my mom. Because of course, you know, it's like, if this were not under her good auspices, this could be something that it would not be favorable. And so I was like, Mom, I will be sued if you don't read this, perhaps by you.
Yeah.
And so I had to like show her the email from the lawyer and force her to read it.
Oh,
And it took her, she said that it took like a week to get through the very first part of the book, which is a first person account of my grandmother's funeral, which I didn't want to start off with because I get a little bit emotional reading it, because it's my grandma. So she struggled to read it. She ultimately did, and she thanked me for writing it, which was really, you know, she's my most important reader aside from you, Karen. But she,
it's really weird you hadn't mentioned me yet, and so I'm glad you brought me in.
No, you know, she thanked me, and that was very, very lovely. And the rest of my family, you know, to my face, they're very nice about it. I
Find your back. That's really funny though. I'd love if there were like a separate family group chat where they're just constantly showing up.
I assume there is. In every Jewish family, there are like 8 group chats that are just like, well, I mean, my grandfather is the most important family member who could like receive this book, and he was comforted by it, and that's like the most important thing, and he's very proud of it, and was calling bookstores, maybe even McNally Jackson, when the book came out, when it was first released last year. He would be like, hi, I'm calling about this book by Bess Kalb. Do you have it?
Wait, I love that. Was he just trying to make sure that they had orders in?
I think he was trying to like drum up.
Okay.
I think he was trying to like talk me up around the water coolers type thing.
That's really sweet. I love that so much.
Yeah.
Have you gone to his house? Is it like chock full of your book? Did he just buy up every copy?
I haven't seen him yet. It's horrible. I mean, I know you are with your grandparents now, which is so wonderful. It's also another reason why I was so excited to talk to you about this because you are also a grandma person, a fan of
Yeah.
yeah, and sort of get the specialness of this relationship. It's an odd subject matter to tackle like a love story between a grandparent and a grandchild.
Yeah,
Um,
it was something I thought you did so beautifully and so well. And it was also really cool to see you channel your grandma's voice and then write in a way that, at least as I didn't know her, but it felt like a very honest person that you were encapsulating. And I could also tell, because I knew you, this isn't Bess. So I was like, this must genuinely be your grandma.
yes.
Um, and then to have your grandma sort of talk to you and sort of have like offhand remarks about your hair or what you're wearing was such a delight. It was so funny. But yeah, that sort of does lead me to a question I had where when you were writing it, how much of that voice do you think was still you, even though you were trying to write as your grandma?
That's a great question, and I really tried to disappear into it. I tried to put myself as far away from the voice as possible.
Yeah.
And of course, I am, a lot of the book is dialogue. It's a quick read if you haven't read it. A lot of white space, as Karen will attest. But I am a character in the book, and so I had to make sure that I was a specific role and my voice was distinct. I found the intimacy of trying to speak as my grandmother also really comforting at a time when I was grieving her loss. So being able to really just push everything else away but her voice, and speak as she spoke was sort of keeping her there, like to have that to have this the special way that she spoke, to have her sort of her even her intonation in it, to have the way that she would interrupt herself, the way that she would criticize my hair, the way that she would always have like a sub agenda. There would be the voicemail that she would leave, and then the message, and it would often not even be revealed. Sometimes just like as like an aside at the end, but to have that way that she communicated, not just the way she spoke, in this sort of like tricky way, this agenda pushing way, was very important. And so I tried to make it her as much as possible. But then there are sort of moments of writing that have to happen, and I kept trying to pull back. I was like, oh, am I being too florid? Is this too authory? Is this? And I found that the parts that hit hardest and the parts that are sort of like most underlined and parts that people quote are places where oddly it is me,
Mhm.
sort of being the writer about my grandma in her voice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. But the thing you were saying about how it's sort of helping you grieve, when did you start writing this book? Had your grandma just passed away?
I mean, really just passed away. I started writing this book, as her eulogy. I started writing this book a few days after she died, and I was tasked with delivering the eulogy at her funeral, um, sort of on behalf of the grandkids. And other grandkids ended up speaking, but there was this assignation that happened where I was definitely going to speak, and I had this perfectly fine eulogy written. And this is odd because our other show is also writing eulogies. But I'm like, but I had this speech about her life, and I found that certainly in like Western and maybe it's Jewish traditions, there's sort of this trite and cliche, accidentally sort of broad way of speaking about the dead, in these super positive terms that seem a little bit impersonal. And it just so wasn't this woman who I just needed so fiercely and loved and just appreciated because of the way she existed and talked to me and loved me. And so I woke Charlie up at 2 a.m. the night before the funeral and was like, would it be in poor taste if I did the eulogy as her? And he was like, yes, that's a horrible idea. What? What kind of like
Like very
Andy
aware.
Kaufman nonsense is like, what? Yeah, exactly. Like coming down. Like, bet you thought. And I was like, you've got to trust me. And he was like, no. Like, this is one of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
but I was like, shush, 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 whatever. And he was like, ooh. And I got up and I read a transcript of a voicemail that she left me, that had been sort of that I like expanded and wrote in her voice, doing her voice. And it was to tell the story of how she would fly up, um, to take care of me when my mom went back to work when I was a few weeks old, and how she would make this trek from Florida to New York and sit in their terrible apartment, by the hospital in Manhattan where my mom was working, and how she would take care of me, and then it dug in at the end, you need to move back to New York by the end of the year. And I did this eulogy, and my whole family was laughing, and they were like looking at each other in recognition, and my grandpa was like smiling, and it made me see that, like, I have her voice. This is the toughest crowd.
Yeah.
And yeah,
It's literally at a funeral.
it
Yeah.
is at a funeral. It is get, I killed. And
Sorry, I
the
heard what you said. Okay, I was like, what is
it's
okay,
because my physical body stopped me from saying
yeah.
it halfway
Yeah.
through. My mouth was like, nope, this
I'm
is
glad you did.
no, this is not appropriate. But the whole point was it was not appropriate. I was up there showing how in the middle of the eulogy, I was like, that's my call waiting. I've got to go. Anyway, hi, Bess. That because that's how everybody knew her. My grandmother was living and breathing into the phone, connecting with all of her grandkids, all of her friends, all the time. And so I had this experience at the funeral after writing as her voice, where I was like, oh, the validation of seeing the recognition in the people who knew her most intimately means that I can do this. And so I had this Word document called Grandma, that I would just go and sit at my computer and, like a maniac, try to like remember everything she told me, and like all of the conversations that we had about like crucial moments, because she was so formative. And I ended up sending it, to Erin Malone, a very brilliant literary agent, and saying like, this is nothing. You asked if I was writing anything, and we had been like joking about like maybe a joke book of like Trump jokes or Twitter or something, and I was like, this is just what I've been writing. It's all I care about these days, and like, apologies, this is nothing. This is grief drivel, and like, excuse me for intruding. And she was like, this is it. This is a book. So that's the long full story of how it happened. It's yeah, grief plus
That's
Erin.
yeah. I've never heard of a book, you know, starting off as a eulogy. That's incredible.
Yeah,
Um,
weird.
but yeah, something you mentioned just now is about how like you essentially transcribed a lot of voicemails from your grandma and stuff, and you transcribe a lot of short scenes that almost read like sketches sometimes because both
Yeah.
of you are very funny and very witty. Did you feel any pressure to make yourself look better in the book? Like, do you feel like you in the book is you in real life?
No, so this the comment that I've gotten from like friends who read it, first was like, you should make yourself funny, because I was the straight man to her. Like, and that's how our relationship was not me cracking my grandma up. It was very much the reverse. Like, I was just sort of like struggling to take in what she had just said and try to react in a way that let her know that like, that's offensive and very mean, but like, congratulations. And um so yeah, I like, and like, that's your good friend you're talking about. So she, or me, and so she was the funny person in our relationship, and I think was sort of mystified that I was this comedy writer. It was almost like, who?
Yeah.
Like,
That's so interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. That's so interesting. When you were writing in her voice, did you feel like you learned new things about her, about the way she thought about things? Were there, I guess, did thinking from her perspective for so long, like, unlock any insights about the way she operated?
yes, that was the most surprising, part of writing a book like this, and it is something I recommend to everybody. If you are going through unspeakable grief, write in the perspective of that person talking about you, and you will, weep openly at your desk. It ended up. I'm not a licensed therapist, but it ended up being this incredibly therapeutic, act of like empathy. And I saw her as to write in the first person as someone else is insane. You just have to assume somebody, and it's an act of a lot of like hubris. It's assuming somebody's motivations, their inner thoughts, and their inner life, and their perspective, and by definition. And so I had to sort of embody her and see me through her eyes and see my mom. And so everybody's role became changed. I was a disembodied person who I like felt bad for. And my grandma was a whole person who was the way she was, not because not just this like great to be around light of the room, but somebody who had struggled and screwed up and was seeking redemption through me.
Yeah.
And I thought about my mom differently too. And ended up becoming much closer to both my mom and, oddly and tragically, my grandma. And I wish that I could see her now with the perspective that I've gained by putting myself in her biography the way I did. So yeah, it wasn't that I had her on a pedestal, but I certainly had her in a role that she was grandma, and like I could see the costume. But just to sort of experience her entire life as a young girl and as a mom, and yeah, it was a trip.
Yeah, it really sounds like it was.
It was. It was psychologically very strange and haunting, but ultimately really great.
really great. I also imagine like if I, when I die someday, to have somebody who I really loved and adored think so fully and closely about my perspective. I think that's such a blessing too, of being like, oh, someone really cared about me and wanted to figure out who I was inside. That's such a wonderful gift, I think, as well.
I hope so. I think that's the best case scenario. My biggest fear,
Yeah.
like right now, is that she would be like, "What?"
Yeah.
Right? Like, and you use this picture?
You didn't crop my leaves off.
Right, right. It's sort of like, oh, great. It looks like our invitation was torn.
Yeah.
Like, but ultimately, after doing so much research and just I think making myself the butt of all of the jokes
Yeah.
and portraying her in a way that felt as true as possible to me. Hopefully she would be hopefully she would be glad that at least her stories are the stories that she told all the time, and the people that she was obsessed with, her mother and her brothers, were now these like folklore characters that everybody knows.
And it's
Yeah.
gonna be a movie? She's gonna be in a
Oh yeah.
movie?
It's gonna be, I mean, that's the bigger thing for her,
Yeah.
because we would go to the same movie by ourselves and then talk about it. We would eat the same snack. We would eat Raisinets and popcorn, and we'd be like, we'd be like, no butter, just a little butter. And we'd be like, can you put a little more butter? Like, we really ate all the same things. Um, and so movies are this like sacred place for both of us. And I think she'd be very excited by that.
That's really exciting. Wait, I want to ask more about the movie. I also really was curious. Uh, you said before it felt like almost your relationship with her deepened after she passed away. And I know, when you're grieving somebody, that's like a lifelong relationship that you now have with grief, in addition to with that person who passed away. Um, and I was wondering, do you think there was also a change in your relationship after it became public? Like after you realized all these, because your book is really popular, a ton of people who don't know you and didn't know your grandma have read it. Do you feel like your relationship to your grandma has changed now that so many people get to, read about it and know about it?
I mean, that's first of all, grief is something that you live for. That's beautifully put, and something that I will think about and helps me contextualize the sort of two versions of my experience with her that I now have. That there's that grieving her is its own relationship, and yeah, I'm very protective of people I love. Like I'll never say any revealing information about my son or show his picture in public. But this person, I feel at once very nervous, but also relieved, and I can kind of only follow my grandpa's lead on that one. Like he had a sign of copies of Nobody Will Tell You This But Me on his on his doorman counter, the greeting counter at his
Oh,
building in Florida where he lived, and they were all signed by him. Uh,
oh my God.
to be like, you want a Hank Bell original? It's page 42 to 60, and it's or whatever, and that's
He
my story.
signed them.
Yeah, of course. So
What
he's
a
like he's so proud, and he routinely thanks me because I think my grandmother is naturally the type of person, and or was. And by the way, it also has changed my relationship with her to talk about her in public anecdotes and to talk about her um with strangers listening. But there is also something, just because of the way this like looming large character that she was for everyone that she knows, like even in the restaurant she was sort of the like there was something very magnetic and focus seeking about her, that this does feel right. Like, of course, everybody, she would say her sort of adages and her commands to me in a way that felt like proselytizing. She was like, when you feel the earth is cracking behind your feet, you put one foot in front of the other, you go forward. And she said that to me 80 times. So of course I would write a book about that and put that in it so that people the world over, or at least like the McNally Jackson over, would have that in their heads too. And and the way that she obsessively tried to bring her mother and brothers back to me, people who were dead long before I was born, made me understand that she felt there was value in storytelling about dead family members, about the deceased, as a way to keep them alive. And as a way to make you care about them and make them feel real, and like giving me mundane details about their daily lives and their sayings and sort of and their values, was something that she instilled in me. And so this was sort of me reading that room a little bit and paying it forward, seeing like, oh, this is how she lived, so this is how she should be commemorated. And I didn't know, I mean, this book came out the first week of national lockdown. So I
Oh,
also thought,
a true year
yeah,
ago.
yeah, I actually I spoke with Maris about it really soon after it was released, and we were just sort of like, so no one will read this book, and that's fine, and like what's important, and that felt equally to me as important, that like, okay, this came out in a time of crisis, and my grandma's whole thing was like comforting people in a time
Yeah.
of crisis. So whether it ended up becoming a success or it came in a way that was just sort of like narrowly delivered to people who sought it out and needed it, like both good, both her, and
Yeah.
like but still it makes me nervous because you can't control something when it's out there. I mean, you've spoken about your grandparents in public as well, and
Yeah.
your grandfather is like, I'm curious to know what that was like for you. Um,
Oh, that's so nice. I mean, I don't talk about them in much detail, I think. I think my
right.
family is a pretty private family. Everything I say about them, I've like run by them first. And my grandpa, when I was like, "Can I show your photo?" He was like, "Yes, I would love this. I would love to have my photo on television." And so I was like, "Okay, great, like cool." But yeah, it is, I do always worry, and this was something I thought was so brave and like really inspiring about your book, is I always worry that something that is really personal to me will lose its sort of preciousness when I share it with people. And of course, I think that's not true unless it's something that, would cause strain to your relationship with that other person. I think most of the time it's just a personal choice that you're making.
Yeah.
And so it was really cool. When I was reading your book, it really felt like I got to meet your grandma and I was talking with her. And also your grandma is the type of person I would love to have as a friend. It's someone who's like
Yes.
always supportive and always there for you, but really honest and tells you their true thoughts. And it's like, that's what you want in somebody. And to find a voice like that in book form, especially at a time, during the pandemic when we want to sort of be held, but also to be shaken and being like, you can do it. Like, you're going to be fine. Buckle up.
Yeah.
It was such a comfort.
I mean, that is exactly the hope. Like, when she died, the grief was, and the sort of the terror was like, oh no, even though she was 90, she was elderly, like she still had these 5 years. She still had to meet my kids. She still had so many things that she had to do. And it's and oh no, now nobody gets to have her. And so it was like taking that and exploding it and being like, everybody have her.
Yeah.
you know, and so that was my sort of like explosive reaction to that. The loss of grief was just like, was giving the version of her that would be most memorable and most crystallized for so many people.
Yeah, that's really lovely. Before we go to the public Q&A, if people have questions, please put them into the chat. I have a question for you that I'm genuinely curious about is, since you've written this as a book and now you're adapting it into a movie, and I know, like, I think your grandma is actually, especially the way you've written her in the book, is very much, I could see her being a movie character, but I think in real life, most of the people we know are very normal people who, you know, you'd have to sort of dazzle, like razzle dazzle them to become a movie character. Do you feel um like in the script that you're writing, are they still able to be accurate representations of these people in your family, or have you had to sort of change them a lot, and if so, do you think, I don't know, how do you feel about that?
I think, I mean, it's hard. It's really hard because it's not just the character that has to be translated, it's the story arc.
Mm,
And so you have, I tried to give the best possible representation of a life and a relationship. And so there are so many details. You can include so much more in a book than you can in a movie, than like a tight, I don't like to watch very long movies. I'm trying
yeah,
to also make a movie with brilliant director and collaborator Elizabeth Chomko, who's so smart and great, and a wizard at exactly this kind of thing, but trying to make a movie that I would want to see and that would be compelling.
mm,
And this sprawling book of like, even somewhat like of jumps through time and of side characters and things that don't necessarily drive like a traditional like linear plot forward. A lot of that has to go. And
yeah,
so the hardest part of it has been trying to sort of whittle it down into this movie shape, and then looking at it and being like, well, this is an entirely different project.
mm,
And that there was also a finality in writing the book, in like writing the last passages of the book, which is something that I did almost midway through writing it. That last section is something that I just sort of like wrote in a burst, and I knew how the book was going to end. Um, and I I felt closure with that, and now I'm sort of like, let's tell this story of this life and this love again. And so I feel like it's important to get it right. It's important to make the character of my grandma feel the way she is in the book, which is just true and unembellished. And I'm not writing her in this theatrical way. She is just naturally funny.
yeah,
And the scenarios in her life story are inherently cinematic. And so I'm just trying to keep it really grounded and true, and not lean into any shtick or any like movie trope. And hopefully people will be like, I enjoyed watching this. Thank you.
yeah, you know, I
Yeah.
hope that's the dream reaction every time you watch it, sort of stoically being, I enjoyed
I
watching
enjoyed this.
this.
There was like when I was at Kimmel, there was my friend Jeff and I would have like this imagined audience reaction. Maybe I've told you this, where if we wrote a monologue joke that bombed, we would just picture one guy in the audience being like, "No," so,
That's great. I
boo.
always wish on a laugh track, you know, like you can hear the people laughing. I wish there was someone just being like, I actually did not like this very
Nope.
much.
So I hope I don't get that guy.
Yeah. Okay, it looks like a bunch of questions are coming in, so we're gonna speed through them.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Um, oh, well, one of the first ones we've already answered, so guess get your things together, people. No, I'm
Yeah.
kidding. Someone wants to ask a gossipy question. Ooh, did your great grandmother who immigrated on a boat by herself, did she ever get to go back and see her own mother again?
No, no, that was the last time when she left, she left. She never went back.
Oh wow. Um,
She couldn't
okay.
afford to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I immigration is it's crazy. It's I've been talking about it a lot with my family recently. We watched Minari and then our family was just crying.
Yep.
Um, and it's crazy how much easier it is now for a lot of places. And I know obviously still very difficult for a lot of countries, but I think before there was this air of finality of I want this life more than what I had before. Okay, too long of
Yes.
it.
No, that's not. And honestly, the grandmother in Minari, this amazing actress who gave the funniest speech of the Oscars,
Yeah.
what is like she is a character that when I saw, I was like, this is so compelling, but it is also exactly the type of older woman comedy that I love to see on film,
Yeah,
which
she's
is
very similar at times to your grandma too. Very sort of like
yes,
blunt but caring and very funny.
good at
Yeah,
cards.
good at cards. Yeah. Okay, another question is obviously you pulled from personal experience and family stories, but what kind of research did you do for this book in addition to that? Or did you?
A lot. Like almost a full college course in shtetl. I have like this stack of books that I've shown. Well, now it's on the floor. But I I threw them down in a rage. There's this whole part of the book about that immigration story, and I shamefully had almost no idea of what it was like and what the journey was like. I had this sort of like very Fiddler on the Roof idea of shtetl life in what I, before writing this book, just considered Russia, which in fact is the Pale of Settlement where Jews were forced to live in Eastern Europe under Tsar Alexander II. And after he was assassinated, a rumor went around saying the Jews did it. And so all of a sudden, kosher meat was taxed disproportionately high, so Jews starved, and the Torah was outlawed, so Jewish men, women weren't taught, but Jewish men became illiterate, and there were these repressive and oppressive laws that were put in place that created the conditions that would cause a 13-year-old to flee alone onto another planet. And so I called I called a friend who was a professor. I called my old college, and they were like, we don't owe you anything. Like, they're like, I'm sorry, you want like a Russian stuff?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, fine, true. And a friend who is a professor at USC connected me with people in Russian Studies department, and then Googling and asking, I found these books that were foundational to this book. To understand what life was like for Rose in the 1880s in Pinsk, which is in Belarus, modern day Belarus. So the Jews of Eastern Europe, very dry, and it's specifically 1772 to 1881. So it was like right on it was a little bit before, but it was certainly the preconditions for like what her brothers would have gone through, what her mom went through, what her dad went through. And it was about the Tsar's army and suffering. And the book, The Bolshevik Experiment in Minsk, was about organizing and activism around getting Jews out and figuring out how to get these forwarding stations working and getting Jews through Europe by basically setting up safe houses along the way. And also just about Minsk, and I didn't know anything about it. Pogrom by Steven Zipperstein was sort of like, well, the absolute abject horror, like to actually learn what it was like to be that scared. And then this is sort of like the Game of Thrones opening credits. It's these maps of how, like, it's impossible that like a child on foot would cross a continent and then an ocean. And this explains all of these different trajectories. All diaspora Jews are in this, like from Tunisia to Odessa and London, Israel, or Palestine, and various places. So I read those. It was in my first trimester of pregnancy, and so I was reading these like horrible stories while also being like super emotional. And that's how I wrote it, and that was how I got that. And then I looked up. Oh, there was also congressional testimony, firsthand congressional testimony from Italian immigrants who were testifying about conditions on steamships that were co-sponsored by Ellis Island and by, I guess, American companies. And in some way, the federal government was involved. And so they advocated on behalf of all immigrants. And these incredible people were talking about like how the kosher food was served in slop and troughs, and about like sexual violence that happened on ships, and about all kinds of, about fake tickets and the swindles and the vaccinations. And so firsthand testimony from Italian immigrants, very powerful. And that's all free. And so this is a long answer, but like, I wanted to get it right because this is the type of topic that has been done and can be done as cliche. and like and myth, and I needed to have it grounded in reality, and that was the thing pulling me through writing this whole book, was like, keep it true.
Yeah.
And then census data taught me about like, there's a copy of the census in this book to show that like,
Census data.
right, like
Yeah.
yeah, and that their language, Rose and Sam and my grandma and her brother's language in New York City census data is listed as Jewish.
Mhm.
So that was a whole, there, yeah, I had to do a lot. And then interviews with my grandfather about his business and about his life, and constant contact with my mom, trying to get her story out, her story exactly correct.
Oh man. So it sounds like you really didn't do any research. No, that's incredible. That's such an incredible, and of course, I think that makes sense. I feel like um anytime I feel like as a reader you can tell when the author has done their research, because even if it's not a ton of history sort of being laid out for you, you can tell that they're writing from a full world and they're writing details from a world that is like, fully fleshed out and dimensional. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's amazing.
Oh,
Okay,
thank
I
God.
think one more question.
Okay,
Um, okay. Oh no, you know what? This is a nice future pointing, I don't know, future forward, whatever. Are you
sure.
working on any other books, or do you have any ideas for books that you'd like to write in the future in your head?
Yes, I have two books that I'm very excited about. One is a children's book, which is
Okay.
now down the process. A children's book that I wrote about toxic masculinity,
Mhm.
um, and,
Topic. This is amazing.
and short men. That's what it's about.
Okay.
My son is in the 11th percentile.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very excited about that. He thinks it's extremely funny. He's
Okay.
20 months old. There's a lot of, so that's,
Do you think
he is
your
the only,
Oh, sorry. I was gonna ask, do you think your son is short because he's 20 months old, or do you think that's like gonna be his thing?
no, I like look at him and I'm like, oh, that's a short guy.
Yeah, exactly. Taller. Okay.
Yeah, it might have to do with the fact that he's one. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Now stepping back from it, now that he's running the streets, I feel like he might grow.
Yes.
I screwed up. The book is canceled.
No, you can just keep writing sequels, and each sequel is about a slightly taller man. You
Yes,
should say.
I will. I'll be like, this is a book about somebody who is suddenly a teenager. And then I have a book that's also a first person, somewhat based on true events, story about suburbia. And I'm
Oh,
working, yeah,
that's nice.
told from the point of view of a very young girl.
I'm excited for both of these. I'm excited for everything you do. I'm excited for your movie. This
I
has been
feel
a
the
joy.
same way
I hope
about you.
it comes back up on screen.
I want to live in the Karen verse. I am excited about your book. I really, really am. I can picture myself in a hammock reading it and laughing. That's my idea of perfect happiness.
That's so nice of you. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who tuned in.
Bess, Karen, I mean, what a wonderful night. I wish there were like 3 more hours we could spend together, but for now, if you want more of Bess, you should probably buy the paperback of her book. And once we have a pre-order for Karen's, it'll be everywhere. But thank you both so much, and thank you to this audience. And please buy books from us. And thank you for being brilliant. Good night.
Thank you,
Yay!
Maris. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone.
You're all the best.
You're
Bye.
all. Bye.